Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. I'm Tony and this is Kate, and today we will be reviewing A Wrinkle in Time, or discussing it rather, because it's not so much a review as a discussion. So, A Wrinkle in Time is written by Madeleine L'Engle. I don't know how to pronounce her name.
L'Engle, I think.
Anyways, and it's the first in a series of, I don't know how many books.
7? I want to say 7, but
I don't know how many books. I think there's 4 in the first quadrology, something like that.
That is the
I don't
word.
know. Yeah, it is something. Anyways, it's the first in the series, and it's
Quartet.
not a new. It's a quartet, right?
Quartet, not a quadrology.
Yes, the Time Quartet is what it's called.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Time Quartet. That's beautiful.
This is a book about 3 children who go on an adventure.
Yeah, it's very much an adventure style story, which I really love.
It's a sci-fi and like fantasy, contemporary type story.
Yeah, initially you think it's fantasy, but then
there's also
like
some
elements
very much. I mean, it's based on Earth, so it would be a low fantasy if it was fantasy, but there is a lot of science fiction aspects to it.
Overall, I think it was a really great book. It had some really strong themes that showed through, and I loved how simple the book was. I had just finished reading more heavy, thick fantasy, so I came out of that and just loved how easily I could understand the science aspects of this, and it just settled in so easy after my hard read.
That's your opinion. You loved it for the simplicity. I didn't. I actually disliked how simple the writing was. It was, in a way, it was almost too simple. It was almost so simple that it was making it harder for me to read it, and
it distracted
it shouldn't have
the
been
story for you.
But it distracted from the story with the way that she almost held your hand and just kind of gently led you through it, and it's like, oh, you're just a little kid reading this book, which, I mean, it is written for younger viewers, so that's, or readers, I guess, younger readers, so that is, you do have to take that into account, but the story is amazing, and it's kids aren't going to fully understand it and fully grasp what's being shown.
And I think what's kind of interesting about the simplicity of it is there's some really dark aspects of this book, and the simplicity almost is the light in some ways. It keeps that light in. So
this story has very much of a dark versus light theming, and there's a darkness, a deep evil darkness type thing. And there's little bits of light that shine through in the story itself, but that's also reflected in the writing style, which is interesting, in that the story is dark, and it's a dark writing style, and it's a dark story, but it's not a bright, happy book. Yeah. It's heavy, and it is in some ways. But at the same time, that's why simplicity is so necessary. Makes it shine through, and having it written for younger audiences is like that light piercing through the darkness. That's impressive that the author was able to capture that. Yeah, I agree. So there's the main themes. They're kind of cliche just because of how many times they've been used, really. But they're good themes. They're themes of things like love will conquer all, or greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends, which are both very strong, very powerful themes, and very true in many ways, but they're also overused, and so that kind of did take a little bit out of it for me, just because I've read that and I've seen that so many times. But again, the themes were written in a way so that it was like the light shining through the darkness. And there's another more subtle secondary theme in a way, that is that your flaws may also be your strengths. Yeah. And that's something for writers that they need to understand, is sometimes you can have a strength, but when you push that strength too far, it becomes a flaw. Right. So take stubbornness, for example. Being stubborn can be a good quality in certain situations,
but it can also be a flaw.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love the theme of family. I think that's a really powerful one that we see through this book. I think that was one that the author really wanted us to understand. Family is the driving goal. Family is actually also the source of the heartache. And family is the source, like the support system too. It's where the love comes from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's well, the themes are well represented.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they're kind of a little bit blatant and in your face, but they're also at times subtle and just there. They just exist rather than, oh, I'm going to say this is the thing. It's just, if you think about it, you can see them, but they're not blatant all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are.
This book is a book of opposites almost. It's dark and yet it's light. It's simple yet it's complex, and the themes are subtle but blatant at sometimes. It's really interesting.
Written for children, but adults will get more out of it than the children will.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. So there's really, what,
5?
7 main characters? There's more than that. There's quite a few main characters. One of them we will not get to because that would stray into spoilers, and we are going to stay away from spoilers for this video at least. But anyway, so the main character, or main 3 characters, I guess, because they're all kind of, I guess you could say she's the main character. So the main character's name is Margaret. She's called Meg the entire book, and she's interesting because I don't think you ever are told how old she is, and at times she seems like she could be 17, 18, 19 years old, but at other times she seems like she's barely 10.
Yeah.
Which,
her age is implied, but never given to us. It's implied, but
never really blatantly. It never says, oh, she's 17 years old or she's 12 years old. I think we decided that she's somewhere between 12 and 13, or 12 and 14, somewhere in that age range. But she's very flawed. She is stubborn, and she's smart, but she's also...
She's very self-conscious.
She's self-conscious. She's not confident in herself, though. Meg is not confident in herself, and so she relies on the other 2 adventurers, I guess we'll call them, to be her confidence, which is interesting because her brother, who is named Charles Wallace, he is very confident, very self-confident. He knows what he knows, and so part of his personality is he is very knowledgeable, and he's a 5-year-old boy. He's very knowledgeable, far more knowledgeable than he should be at that age. But he doesn't have the maturity, because he's only 5 years old, so he can't have seen and lived long enough to have the maturity. And so that confidence mixed with the lack of maturity causes issues through the book, and that's one of the driving plots is the issues that he causes, in a way.
Calvin is really the rock of the adventurers. He's the one who feels the most stable, and I find that really interesting because he struggles with so much in his family life. He has a lot of difficulties, but he doesn't dwell on those, I guess. He works with them.
Yeah. He tries to overcome them. He works to overcome them. And he is just there. He's consistent and he's constant, and he's the rock for Meg. He's who Meg relies on when all else fails.
It's also really interesting because Meg and Charles Wallace are very focused on their family, and like I said, their support comes from their family, and their heartache comes from their family, and it's the same for Calvin. It's the thing they have in common, and I think that really draws them together through the story.
So then there's also Father, who is basically the end goal. They're trying to find Father. Like all the characters in this story, he's flawed, and the way that he is written, the children, or the adventurers, as we're calling them, is they view him differently than the reader views him, because as the reader, you know what's going on. You see all these different aspects and why things are the way they are. But as the adventurers, Meg doesn't know all these things that we know. And so when she is looking for her father and they're searching and she's hoping, okay, he's going to solve all this stuff, that may not be the case, because that's not how life works. He's a man, he's flawed.
Meg is expecting to go to find her father and everything to be back like it was before, but the fact is that time has passed and things have changed and you can't go back, and they're going to have to learn to live differently, and that's something that Meg really struggles with at first.
Yeah. And then there's what are called the three misses, or I don't even know if that's the right term, because it's MRS, but there's no period after it, like
Mrs. Who, Mrs. What's-It, and Mrs. Which. And the three misses are really interesting to me. They each have their own distinct areas of personalities. And I kind of spotted a little bit of an allegory with the three of them, so that was fun. They're very key to the story, but I really like that with all their power, they don't enable, well, I don't know how to put this.
They don't solve the problems for Meg.
They enable her to solve the problems, but it's her responsibility to do that. Yeah. Something she has to struggle with. So they help her get to that point, but then it's her turn, you know?
But they don't give her the answers either. They just, they prod her along and help her unlock her full potential.
Yeah, yep.
But they're interesting. For spoiler's sake, we won't get into what they are or who they are, but they are different. They're powerful and mysterious and just very different from the adventurers.
Yep.
So one of the things I really liked about this book was the descriptions. The author, and I'm not going to say her name because I can't pronounce it, but the author writes the descriptions in such a way that they're very vivid and very exact.
Yeah.
You know what you're seeing. You understand what you're seeing, and you get a sense of being there in the moment with the characters because of how detailed she is without over describing them.
Mm-hmm. I loved that there was some complicated aspects of science in there, but I could understand that. I could comprehend it, and that's partially because of the simplicity, and she wanted children to be able to understand this. But I loved how logical and believable the explanations were.
Yeah.
They're very believable. It added to the realism of the story.
Oftentimes in stories and science fiction and stuff, if you know science or have studied much science, you will see things you're like, this doesn't quite add up, this isn't quite right. Mm-hmm. But the way that she wrote it, you can tell she's done some research and figured out, okay, this is maybe how something would work.
Right.
And so the science seems real and believable as well, and that's always a positive, no matter what story you're in.
Yeah, and even though this book wasn't perfect, I ended reading it with a really good feeling. I wanted to read more. I wanted to go find the rest of the series because I wasn't done with the characters. I wanted to see more. I'd fallen in love with them, and I wanted to see where their lives took them. So.
The story doesn't end at the end of the book. It's almost like the first chapter ends, but then they have more to go before the final showdown in many ways.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, leave a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already. Tell us what you think in the comments below about how our format for these reviews, these discussions. Tell us what you think of the book if you've read it, or if you are now interested enough to want to read it. Down in the description below, there's a link to our Instagram page. You can follow us on Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys.